Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Karen in Northern California, Yehudit in South Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Gordo in Scotland. Must be Friday. Great to have you with us. Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Shandora in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Renee, Shabbat Shalom. Just now learned of the passing of my teacher, Chazan Jack Kessler, heartbroken. Baruch Dayan Emes, may the Neshama have an Aliyah. I'm so sorry, Renee. May you be comforted at this difficult time. Lorraine in Texas, and Ella and Rochelle in Modesto, and Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf today is page 91. We're actually picking it up near the bottom of page 90b, but it's 91 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. And with this, we should be completing chapter 5. And the way the Koran Talmud is volumed, is indexed as it were, we'll finish the first volume of Bava Basra, meaning we're about halfway through this tractate, the longest tractate in the Talmud. Okay, so we've been doing Mishna number 11 here in chapter 5. Come on, Facebook, don't do that. Don't do that. Sorry. I don't know why. The reason you often see me leaning forward like this in the middle is I'm monitoring the Facebook feed, and for some reason it just says ended, like the broadcast ended. I know it hasn't ended, and so if I just reload, then I'm seeing it again. I just don't know why Facebook on my desktop does that. Anyway, the sages taught, one may not export produce from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, if it consists of items that contain an element of basic sustenance, such as wines, oils, and flours, because this causes them to become more expensive in the land of Israel. So these are practices and laws and decrees of the sages that are going to protect poor people from having to spend more money than they're able on basic necessities. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera permits export in the case of wine because this lessens licentiousness in the land of Israel. And just as one may not export these types of produce from the land of Israel to outside the land of Israel, so too one may not export them from Eretz Yisrael to Syria, as Syria is not considered part of the land of Israel in this context. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, permits the export of produce from the northernmost province of Eretz Yisrael to the southernmost province of Syria. Very interesting conversation in light of recent events. I'm just going to keep going. We're on page 91a now. The sages taught one may not earn a profit in Eretz Yisrael by buying and reselling items that contain an element of basic sustenance, such as wines, oils, and flowers, because this causes their price to rise. Rather, those who grow the produce should sell them in the markets without recourse to a middleman. And the sages said to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that he would earn a profit through the sale of wine and oil. And with regard to wine, he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, who says that it is permitted to export wine from Eretz Yisrael, despite the fact that this causes it to become more expensive, because drinking wine leads to licentiousness. With regard to oil, in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's locale, oil was common. Consequently, there was no concern that its price would rise if it was not sold directly to the consumer. Now, given that, that's why we can understand there are many Israeli products, even of kind of these kind of base. Certainly, Israeli wine is exported quite a bit. Usually, at our Shabbos table, we're drinking Israeli wine, and in the modern, ecosystem, there's just much more produce available, much more infrastructure for distributing produce around the world. So the fact that we're importing products from Israel is not driving prices up in Israel. In fact, quite the contrary. The stronger the economy of Israel is, and thanks to exports, the economy becomes stronger, the better the people in Israel are doing. We're talking about a time here when things were quite different, and the movement of goods across national borders and just long distance travel was obviously much more difficult in Talmudic times. The sages taught one may not earn a profit twice from the sale of eggs. And Mari Bar Mari said Rav and Shmuel disagree about the meaning of that statement. One said that it means that the seller may not charge double the price that he paid for the eggs. And the other said that one merchant may not sell to another merchant. Rather, the merchant who buys from the owner of the eggs must sell directly to the consumer. We don't want too many middlemen because, of course, the final price is going to be much higher. Excuse me. Apropos price fluctuations, the Gemara cites a Baraisa. The sages taught a community sounds the alarm and gathers in public prayer for merchandise whose price has dropped. And even on Shabbos, it is permitted to cry and plead, even though one may not pray for his personal needs on Shabbos, as this hardship affects the entire public, right? We're not just talking about prices change. We're talking about prices change so much that the economic well-being of an entire community is threatened. Like the whole community will not be able to sustain itself and will end up, a ghost town. People won't have enough work. They'll have to leave, go elsewhere. That's the kind of hardship we're talking about. Rabbi Yochanan said, the Baraisa is referring specifically to merchandise that serves as the basis of the local economy, such as linen garments in Babylonia and wine and oil in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Yosef said, and that law, that halacha, that public prayer is recited even on Shabbos, applies only when the merchandise was reduced in price and stood at such prices that goods that had been worth 10 are currently selling for 6, right? So a 40% drop. The sages taught one may not leave Eretz Yisrael to live outside of Eretz Yisrael unless the price of 2 sa of grain stood at a sela, which is double its usual price. Rabbi Shimon said, in other words, it's too expensive to live there for the poor people. Rabbi Shimon said, when does this exception permitting one to leave Eretz Yisrael under certain circumstances apply? It applies when one is unable to find produce to buy, as he has no money. But when one has money and is able to find produce to buy, even if the price of a sa of grain stood at a sela, he may not leave. Right? In matters of holiness, we ascend, we do not descend. That's a general principle. It's used, for example, to talk about a Kohen Gadol, right? So the high priest, when the temple is standing, let's say a Kohen Gadol becomes incapacitated. He has an accident, he's in a coma, or he's very ill. Okay, so they're going to elevate one of the other Kohanim to become the Kohen Gadol, because the Kohen Gadol has duties that need to be performed by someone. So they'll elevate another Kohen to be the high priest. After the original high priest recovers, does the temporary high priest get demoted and he becomes a regular priest again? No, that's the problem. In matters of holiness, we ascend, we do not descend. So then they have to find some kind of an arrangement of how to, accord proper honor to the original high priest, who really is the high priest, and then you're going to have kind of a deputy high priest situation. Or this is one of the reasons why we increase the number of Hanukkah candles each night, although you might have said that really what was going on was the oil was running out in the miracle of Hanukkah, so you might have thought that we would decrease the number of candles each night, but rather we increase, because in matters of holiness we ascend. So here, when we're talking about people who've made aliyah, right? Making aliyah is the phrase that we use for somebody who, leaves the diaspora, a Jew who leaves the diaspora, meaning Jewish communities outside of the land of Israel, and moves to Israel to live there, to reside in Israel. So that's called making aliyah. Now, aliyah, that's the same word as the olah, the elevation offering, right? In other words, it's somebody who is ascending. Making aliyah means you ascend, and we're talking about somebody who ascends in spiritual matters, in spiritual holiness, because he's able to fulfill many more commandments, the commandments that are only possible to fulfill when one is living in Israel. So when somebody makes aliyah, when he ascends to live in Israel, if he leaves, he's then going down, right? And so the sages are saying, now obviously there are religious people who move to Israel and there are religious people who leave Israel. It's not always possible to fulfill this commandment. I mean, there are problems. It's not easy to change countries. And it's not easy to live in Israel. Many people do. So many people are making aliyah constantly. And so many of them are saying to me, what are you doing, Sal? You live in a millennium, as opposed to earlier millennia, when Jews could not live in Israel. Now it's possible. Why aren't you there? We think about it a lot. And God willing, one day we will. But even so, sometimes people move there, and then for whatever reasons, whatever their career is, whatever their situation is, whatever their family situation is, everyone has different situations. But they're not able to stay. And so according to this, they would be violating this decree of the sages that one who is living in Israel should not move out of Israel. But even here it says unless, right? So there are reasons why it just doesn't work. So let's keep reading. And Rabbi, I just want to make sure I've got it right. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon said, why can't I find what I'm just reading? Yeah, but when one has money and is able to find produce to buy, even if the price of a seah of grain stood at a selah, he may not leave. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai would likewise say, Elimelech and his sons, Malon and Kilion, were prominent members of their generation and were leaders of their generation. And for what reason were they punished? They were punished because they left Eretz Yisrael to go outside of Eretz Yisrael. This is the background of the book of Ruth, right? So this was Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, and his sons who were married to Ruth and Orpah, right? And then Elimelech died, leaving Naomi a widow. And then his sons died, leaving her daughters-in-law also as widows. And that's when Naomi decides to go back to the land of Israel. And who goes with her? Both young women say they will go with her. She says, why do you want to leave your country to come to mine? You should stay here with your people. Orpah stays. Ruth stays with her, Ruth the Moabite. And she comes back with Naomi, ends up marrying Boaz, who is a relative of Naomi's. And Ruth, just becomes the prototypical convert to Judaism, and becomes such an important convert that she merits to be the great-grandmother of King David. It's funny that I'm reading this today because, I have the joke book coming out. I think I've mentioned it on the show. Let My People Laugh, greatest Jewish jokes of all time, based on all the jokes I've been telling on Instagram and TikTok, and some of them have been on Facebook as well. And I got a book deal out of it. Skyhorse Publishing came to me. And so now I'm working with the publicist. And because it's a joke book, one thing that they thought would be cute is to have, obviously fake blurbs on the back of the book, that Moses and Noah and Abraham said this is the best joke book of all time. And then, Nina and I were working on it yesterday to make them funnier. And one of the little blurbs is, I converted for the jokes, Ruth the Moabite. So here we are reading about Ruth the Moabite. And people might recognize the reference to Jerry Seinfeld's dentist. Anyway, let's keep reading. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai would likewise say that Elimelech and his sons, Mahlon and Chilion, were prominent members of their generation. They were leaders of their generation. Why were they punished that they all died? Because they left Eretz Yisrael to go live outside of Eretz Yisrael. As it is stated concerning Naomi and Ruth, Ruth 1:19, and all the city was astir concerning them, and the women said, is this Naomi? And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase, is this Naomi? How does this indicate that her husband and sons were punished for leaving Eretz Yisrael? And Rabbi Yitzchak says that the women said, have you seen what befell Naomi, who left Eretz Yisrael for outside of Eretz Yisrael? Not only did she not escape tribulations there, they left because there was a famine in the land, but she lost her status entirely, lost her husband, lost her sons, comes back a woman really in very difficult situation with this one daughter-in-law with her. And Rabbi Yitzchak also says with regard to this passage, that very day when Ruth the Moabite came to Eretz Yisrael, the wife of Boaz died. I.e., from the moment of their arrival, the possibility was created for Ruth's eventual marriage to Boaz. And this explains the adage that people say, before the deceased dies, the person who will next be in charge of his house arises. As in this case, Boaz's new wife, Ruth, arrived just as his previous wife died. Apropos the story of Ruth, the Gemara adds that Rabba bar Rav Huna says, that Rav says, the judge Ibzan of Bethlehem, see Judges 12:8 through 10, that judge is Boaz. And the Gemara asks, what is he teaching us? And the Gemara explains that this comment is in accordance with the other statement of Rabba bar Rav Huna. As Rabba bar Rav Huna says that Rav says, Boaz prepared 120 feasts for his children at their weddings. As it is stated concerning Ibzan, and he had 30 sons and 30 daughters he sent abroad, and 30 daughters he brought in from abroad for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. That's Judges 12:9. And the verse indicates that he had 60 children. And that each and every wedding he prepared for his children, he made 2 feasts. One in the house of the father of the groom, and one in the house of the father-in-law of the groom. And he did not invite Manoah, the future father of Samson, whose wife was barren. See Judges 13:2. He didn't invite Manoah to any of these feasts. As he said, it is not worth inviting him. He is a sterile mule. How will he pay me back? Manoah will never invite me in return, as he has no children. Whew. This sounds really harsh. Let's keep reading. A sage taught, and all of the children of Ibzan died during his lifetime. Okay, so this kind of pettiness seems to have resulted in a terrible outcome. And this explains the adage that people say, why do you need the 60 children that you beget during your lifetime? Go to the trouble and beget one who will be more diligent than 60. And this adage refers to Boaz, who had 60 children who died, and yet his last child, born from Ruth, is his glory as King David was born from this line. Maybe a little bit more of a metaphoric spiritual takeaway is, better to have one true friend, right, than 60 acquaintances that you can't count on, 60 people who call themselves your friend. You call them friend, but are they really a friend in time of need? Again, better to have one relative who is dear to you and that you can count on, and he can count on you or she can count on you, than a big family where everyone is distant and, full of spats and, problems. I mean, I don't want to say it's better not to have so much family. I'm not saying that. But you get my point. Even outside the world of friends and relatives, I think we can just come up with many cases where people just want to have a lot of something, whether it's acquaintances or material, goods, whatever, and you're just so much better off, with the people and the objects and the things and the pursuits, the professions, the things that are dear to you, that you care about, that you can serve God with a whole heart as you're engaged with them or with these things. Now, the Gemara provides a mnemonic for the ensuing statements that Rav Hanan bar Rava said that Rav said. Melech Avraham, 10 years when he died, and he alone was exalted. This is just the reminders. Here's what we're talking about. Rav Hanan bar Rava says that Rav says, with regard to Elimelech, right, Naomi's husband, and Boaz's father, Salmon, and so, the unnamed relative, who was a closer relative to Elimelech than Boaz, but who did not want to marry Ruth, and Naomi's father, all of these are descendants of Nachshon, the son of Aminadab, the head of the tribe of Yehuda, of Judah, right? He was the first guy to enter the sea when they came out of Egypt, right before, like Moses lifted his staff, but there's a midrash that says that the waters of the sea did not part for the Jews to cross through until one of the Jews stepped into the water, in fact, up to his nose, showing his emunah, his faith, that the water would part. And only when it reached up to his nose, then the sea parted. And that's this Nachshon, the son of Aminadab that we're talking about. So the head of the tribe of Judah. The Gemara asks, what is he teaching us by this statement? That this is the ancestor of all these relatives and people mentioned in the book of Ruth. He is teaching that even in the case of one who has the merit of his ancestors to protect him, the merit does not stand for him when he leaves Eretz Yisrael to go outside of Eretz Yisrael, as Elimelech died on account of this sin. And Rav Hanan bar Rava says that Rav says the mother of Abraham was called Amatle bat Karnevo. The mother of Haman was called Amatle bat Orevati. And your mnemonic to ensure that the two are not confused for one another is that a raven, the word for that is Orev, is impure. You can't eat a raven. It's not a kosher bird. And in this manner, one remembers that Orevati is the grandmother of the impure Haman, while a sheep is pure, a kar, which indicates that Karnevo is the grandmother of the pure Abraham. Rav Hanan bar Rava, it continues, the mother of David was named Natzvat bat Adael. The mother of Samson was named Tzelelponit, and his sister was called Nashian. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference as to what their names were? Why do we need to know that? And the Gemara answers, it is important with regard to an answer for heretics who inquire into the names of those women, which are not stated in the Bible. And one can reply that there is a tradition handed down concerning their names. Yes. One of the things I also do is, on that Instagram page where I've been sharing jokes, is I've been sharing Torah and Talmud. Lately, you may be aware, it's been in the news that enemies of the Jews are slandering the Talmud. You all know what the Talmud is because we learn it together every day. But there's an old tradition, and it's gone on for centuries, of enemies of the Jews taking a line here and there out of context from the Talmud and saying that this proves that the Jews are vile, vicious, evil, bad people. Right? and they absolutely don't understand what they're reading, why it's out of context, why it's mistranslated. Or if perhaps it's almost like if you are a Shakespeare fan, you could take a line from one of the villains in Shakespeare saying something really awful and say, well, there you go. That's Shakespeare. You know, something that's in the mouth of one of his villains represents all of Shakespeare, and therefore we can dismiss the entire, works of Shakespeare. It's ridiculous. But this definitely does go on, and this idea of know what to answer a heretic is important. So it's one of the things, that God willing, as we learn together every day, if you're ever challenged, what the Talmud, isn't that just a horrible book that says terrible things? You're like, yeah, no. Have you read any of it when you're accusing the Jews? And this just happened to me on the page. Somebody says, where does it say in the Bible that Moses ordained rabbis and that therefore rabbis have authority? I'm like, where does it say that in the Bible? It doesn't need to say it in the Bible. We do have a chain of transmission which is spelled out at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, which is part of the Mishna, where it says that Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai, and that includes the written Torah and the oral Torah. And he transmitted it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. And then eventually we get into the pairs of rabbis, and then to the sages who we're familiar with from these pages, the greatest of whom appear sort of in that greatest hits of Jewish wisdom, which is Pirkei Avos. And that's the chain of transmission and the chain of authority that leads to the rabbis. But this guy thinks it's a gotcha, that the Bible itself doesn't say that Moses ordained rabbis. And I tried to explain that to him, and then he got vituperative, and I said, I see, you're not here to learn something, you're just here to express your Jew hatred. Bye-bye. Okay, anyway, sorry for the asides. That's what's been going on. Where are we? Okay, so in other words, so how do we know the names of these women in the Bible, the mother of David, right, and the mother of Samson? They're not spelled out in the Bible, but we do have this oral tradition that certainly has grown over the centuries, but there are core teachings, that have come to it. Some of them were given at Mount Sinai, and others like this, figures that were part of history, but who didn't make it into the Bible, did make it into the oral tradition, and that's how we have them. And Rav Chanan bar Rava says that Rav says our forefather Abraham was imprisoned for 10 years because he rejected the idol worship that was accepted in his land. And he was imprisoned for 3 years in the city of Kuta and 7 years in Kardu. And Rav Dimi of Nehardea teaches the opposite, that he was imprisoned 7 years in Kuta and 3 in Kardu. And Rav Chisda said the small passage of Kuta, this is Ur of the Chaldeans. And you can that's sort of hinted at in Genesis 11:31. And Rav Chanan bar Rava says that Rav says, on that day when our forefather Abraham left the world, right, when he was nifter, when he died, the leaders of the nations of the world stood in a line in the manner of mourners and said, woe to the world that has lost its leader, and woe to the ship that has lost its captain. Because, of course, Abraham was the first person to bring monotheism into the world, knowledge of the one God. Now we're on page 91b. With regard to leaders, the Gemara adds that it is stated in praise of God, quote from 1 Chronicles 29:11, and you are exalted as head above all. So Rav Chanan bar Rava says that Rav says, even one with the most insignificant position of authority, for example, an appointee over irrigation, is appointed by heaven. Right? So this idea that if you have responsibility, any kind of leadership responsibilities, so God puts you in that place. Now, we might immediately ask, well, but there are a lot of corrupt leaders. Why did God put them in that place? I don't know. Maybe because we need to bring them down from that place, and it was to inspire us to do that. Maybe because other leaders need to step up. Maybe it's because these people could actually have a change of heart and grow into that position. I don't know. But here what we're learning is, and we've seen this many times, that God takes a more direct interest in the affairs of kings. And now we're saying God has even more than a normal interest in any kind of leadership, people in any leadership position. Quite possibly also what it means is that God watches people in leadership positions. They maintain their free will. So if they're going to act in a corrupt manner, they're free to do that. But the punishment for them is going to be greater than other people doing the same behavior who are not leaders, right? So it's quite a responsibility being a leader. The Gemara returns to its discussion of the punishment of Elimelech and his sons, which Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says they received because they left Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. So Rachia bar Avin says that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, heaven forfend that they sinned in this manner, as if Elimelech and his sons had found even bran, they would not have left Eretz Yisrael. And so here's defenders of Elimelech. They didn't leave because they had a choice. They were punished because they should have requested mercy from God for their generation. And they did not request this. As it is stated, when you cry, let those you have gathered deliver you. Because they were spiritually prominent people, they should have used their gift to pray to God on behalf of the community. And apparently they did not. Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says they taught that it is prohibited to leave Eretz Yisrael only if money is cheap, i.e. not excessively difficult to obtain, and produce is expensive, similar to the case in the Baraisa where 2 sa of wheat are sold for a selah. But when money is expensive, i.e. it is difficult to earn money for sustenance, even if the price of 4 sa of grain stood at a selah, one may leave Eretz Yisrael in order to survive. Right? It's a commandment to live in Israel, not to die in Israel. So if you're going to, the only way to be in Israel is to starve in Israel, you can leave Israel. The Gemara provides a mnemonic for the following list of Rabbi Yochanan's recollections. Selah, laborer, carob, boy. They would say. The first statement is that Rabbi Yochanan said, I remember when 4 sa of produce was sold for 1 selah, which is a good price. And yet, there were many swollen from hunger in Tiberias, as they did not have even 1 Isser coin with which to purchase food. And Rabbi Yochanan further said, I remember when laborers would not agree to work on the east side of the city because they would die from the smell of the bread that would waft over them from the city's west side. And Rabbi Yochanan said, more positive note, I remember when a child would break a carob and a line of honey would extend over his 2 arms. And Rabbi Lazar said, I remember when a raven would take a piece of meat and the line of fat would extend from the top of the wall upon which it was standing to the ground. And Rabbi Yochanan said, I remember when a boy and a girl, 16 and 17 years of age, would walk together in the market and they would not sin. And Rabbi Yochanan said, I remember when they would say in the study hall that one who agrees with the Gentiles falls into their hands, and that one who relies on them sees that which is his become theirs. Certainly, yeah, especially in these times, I was going to say, in those times that we're talking about when it was so dangerous to be a Jew, pretty dangerous times. Now, we certainly encourage friendship between Jews and non-Jews. But dependence on people outside our community is something that the sages are advising against strongly. The Gemara returns to its discussion of the story of Ruth. It is written, Malon and Chilion, right, the sons who died, and it is written elsewhere, Joash and Saraph, who had dominion in Moab. That's in 1 Chronicles 4:22. So apparently both names refer to the same individuals who married Moabite wives. And Rav and Shmuel disagreed with regard to their true names. One says their given names were Mahlon and Chilion. And why were they called by the names Saraph and Joash? One was called Joash, or let's say Yoash, because they despaired, same root as Nitya Ashu, of the redemption of Eretz Yisrael, as they established themselves in Moab and lived there for many years. Maybe they left because there was a famine. Why didn't they come back when the famine ended? The other was called Saraph because they were liable to receive the punishment of burning, Serefa, for their sins against God because they left their community. And one of them says, the other sage here who's interpreting why they have different names in different parts of the Bible, their given names were Yoash and Saraph. And why were they called by the names Mahlon and Chilion? One was called Mahlon, Machlon, because they made their bodies profane, chulin. Profane means not holy. And the other was called Chilion, because they were liable to receive the punishment of destruction, kalaya, for their sins against God. Again, related verbs. The Gemara notes, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the one who says that their given names were Machlon and Chilion. As it is taught in the Baraisa, what is the meaning of that which is written? And Jokim, or Yokim, and Yokim, and the men of Kozeba, and Yoash and Saraph, who had dominion in Moab, and Yashubi Lechem. And the matters are ancient, right? This very terse writing from 1 Chronicles 4:22. So what are we learning here from all these names? And Yokim, this refers to Joshua, who established Shechekim and kept the oath with the people of Gibeon. See Joshua chapter 9. And the men of Kozeba, these are the men of Gibeon, who lied to Joshua, saying that they came from a distant land. And Yoash and Saraph, these are Machlon and Chilion. And why are they called by the names Yoash and Saraph? One was called Yoash because they despaired of the redemption, and the other is called Saraph because they were liable to receive the punishment of burning for their sins against God. The phrase, who had dominion in Moab, this means that they married Moabite women. And Yashubi Lechem, this is referring to Ruth the Moabite, who returned, Sheshava, and attached herself to Bethlehem of Judea. And the phrase, and the matters are ancient, this means that these matters were said by the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days. And this phrase is a reference to God used in the book of Daniel. And the Bryce is saying that all of these events, which are hard to comprehend and appeared arbitrary at the time they occurred, were all intended by God. It's God's unseen, hidden hand working in history. So what did it say? I'm sorry. Okay, and the matters are ancient. This means that these matters were said by the Ancient of Days, meaning God, i.e., they occurred through God's will. As it is written, I have found David my servant, from Psalm 89. And the same term, found, also appears with regard to the daughters of Lot, as it is written, your two daughters that are found here, from Genesis 19:15. And this teaches that David's ancestry can be traced this far back, as he was destined to be born of Moab, who was the son of Lot's daughter and Lot himself. Right, so Lot's daughter, in that whole episode of Sodom and Gomorrah, when they ran off into the hills, Lot and his two daughters, and they saw the whole the land burning before them, and they thought that they were seeing some kind of, post-apocalyptic Holocaust, and those daughters thought that the only three humans left in the world were Lot and his two daughters, and that's why they got their father drunk and slept with him and were impregnated by him. And one of the sons of that union was named Moab, right? And that's the Moabites. That was the predecessor of the Moabite land that eventually Ruth would come from. And so that's why we say that David's, that what would eventually lead to the creation of King David began in that incident with Lot and one of his daughters, and continued through, and then the other side of it is this whole story in the book of Ruth. Let's keep going. So the Gemara cites a Baraisa that analyzes the next verse. These were the potters and those who dwelt among plantations and hedges, and there they dwelt, occupied in the king's work. That's 1 Chronicles 4:23. These were the potters. These are the sons of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, who kept, not Zero, their father's oath. Those who dwelt among plantations, this is referring to Solomon, who in his kingship was similar to a plant, and hedges, Ugdera, this is the Sanhedrin, which fenced in the breaches of the Jewish people by means of ordinances. There they dwelt, occupied in the king's work. This is referring to Ruth the Moabite, who saw the kingship of Solomon, the grandson of her grandson. Right, so isn't that interesting that Ruth the Moabite, her great-grandson was King David, so her great-great-grandson was King Solomon, and she lived to see that. As it is stated about Solomon, and he caused a throne to be set for the king's mother. And Rabbi Elazar says this means for the mother of the dynasty of kingship and refers to Ruth. Since the Gemara has discussed times of famine in Eretz Yisrael, it concludes the chapter with a blessing of times of prosperity. The sages taught, when the verse states, and you shall eat the produce of the old store, in Leviticus 25:22, referring to the produce grown in the 6th year of the sabbatical cycle, this means without salmonton. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of without salmonton? And Rav Nachman said, without worms that consume the produce. And Rav Shesha said, without blight, which destroys the taste of produce. In other words, when our spiritual level was high enough, and the temple was standing, and everybody tithed properly, etc., so then there was so much produce in the 6th year of every 7-year cycle that the people didn't farm in the 7th year and didn't need to. There was plenty of food. And every 50 years, they wouldn't farm for the 7th year of the 7th cycle, and then the 50th year, which was the Yovel, the Jubilee year. So 2 years they didn't farm the land, but there was plenty to eat because the harvests were so rich leading up to that. The Gemara notes, it is taught in a Barais in accordance with the opinion of Rav Sheshis, and it is taught in another Barais in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman. It is taught in a Barais in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman, from the verse, and you shall sow the 8th year, and you shall eat of the produce of the old store until the 9th year. One might have thought that the Jewish people will wait for the new produce because the old store had been destroyed. Therefore, the same verse states, until its produce comes in, to indicate that they will not stop eating the old produce until the new produce comes of itself, i.e. until it is fully ripe, and they do not need the old produce. The old produce will last. It won't rot. It won't develop disease. It won't be eaten by vermin. You will have enough produce, and it will last so that you will not go hungry. It is taught in a Barais accordance with the opinion of Rav Sheshis, from the verse, and you shall eat the produce of the old store. One might have thought that the Jewish people will wait for the new produce that is due to the old. One might have thought that the Jewish people will wait for the new produce due to the old store, because the old store will have gone bad, since blight will ruin the taste of the produce. Therefore, the verse states, until its produce comes in, which indicates that they will not stop eating the old produce until the new produce comes of itself, as the stored produce will not suffer from blight. The sages talk with regard to a verse in the chapter of the blessings stated to the Jewish people, and you shall eat old store long kept. And this teaches that any produce that is older than other produce of that same type will be better than that other produce. And I've derived that this is the case only with regard to items for which it is the normal manner to age them. From where do I derive in the case of items for which it is not the normal manner to age them, things that are normally the fresher they are, the better? For example, fruit, that they too will improve with age. This would be a miraculous turn of events. And the verse states, old store long kept. A general expression that indicates that in any case, the land will keep its produce from spoiling, as all types of produce will improve with age. Again, this is when we can't, work the vineyards and the orchards and the fields because of the sabbatical year. Don't worry, God will take care of it and everybody will still eat well. Eventually, when the spiritual level of the people declined, eventually we were exiled. The land wasn't able to sustain the people, or the land did not sustain the people because the people did not merit to be sustained by the land. I am almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And the continuation of the verse, you shall bring forth the old from before the new, teaches that there will be storehouses full of old produce and threshing floors full of new produce. And the Jewish people will say, how will we manage to take out this produce from the storehouse before that produce is brought in? And Rav Papa said, everything that is old is superior in quality to the new, except for dates, liquor, and small fish, which are better when they are fresh, according to Rav Papa. And that concludes chapter 5 here in Tractate Bava Basra. And God willing, tomorrow night, after Shabbos ends in LA, and it's getting earlier and earlier, we will continue with chapter 6 here in Tractate Bava Basra. Okay, just a few questions. Sharon, Moses did give smicha to Joshua. That only means that he laid his hands on him. Right, exactly. Smicha is the term for ordaining a rabbi, but the word that we use, smicha, is laying hands on. The same smicha that we do when a person would bring an offering when the temple was standing. They would put their hands on the animal in the company of the priest, and then the animal would be taken by the priest to be offered on the altar. And we do read in Deuteronomy that Moses transfers authority to Joshua. Joshua will lead the people after Moses, and Moses puts his hands on Joshua. And so he did ordain Joshua, and eventually, Joshua ordained the rest. We don't call it ordination. We don't call Joshua a rabbi, but there is this transmission of authority from Moses to Joshua, and so on. Ilanit, refuah shlema, and be blessed with abundant shalom bayis. May you and yours be written and sealed in the book of life for a good new year. Amen. What a beautiful blessing. We're in the second half of the Hebrew month of Elul. We're already past the full moon. The full moon is always in the middle of a Hebrew month. The new moon is when a month turns over. So we're in the second half of Elul, and that means that Rosh Hashanah is quite close. Rosh Hashanah is quite close. When we get closer, we'll publish the class schedule, because obviously during the holidays, we're going to have to take some days off. It's nice that we are ahead. We're about 3 days ahead. And that will stand us well around the holiday time. But this is definitely a time when we wish each other blessings, and may you be written and sealed for a blessing in the new year. And Sharon, last question. Machlon and Kilion mean disease and disaster, literally. And Moab means of or from my father. Why aren't those referenced? I don't know. Good question. Moab, I think, was referenced there. They talked about it at least a little bit indirectly. But I'm surprised that when they're talking about all these other meanings or alternate names of Elimelech's sons, that they don't mention these literal meanings. I think that's a great question. I don't know the answer. That's what I've got for us today. And may we all be blessed with a peaceful, uplifting, and rejuvenating and healing Shabbos. We say amen.